A man driving home late at night slams on the brakes when a horse suddenly blocks his car in the middle of the road. Confused and frustrated, he steps out, trying to shoo the animal away. But the horse doesn't budge. Instead, it stares at him with urgency and begins leading him off the road, deeper into the darkness. What he finds next will leave him shaken to his core, a discovery that will not only change his life, but reveal the true reason this horse stopped him in his tracks. What could possibly make this animal act so deliberately? And how will it transform everything he thought he knew? This is a story of mystery, courage, and the unbreakable bond between man and nature. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Ethan Grayson rubbed his tired eyes as he stacked the last of his students' papers into his worn leather briefcase. The small desk lamp in his colleague's study cast a warm glow across scattered red pens and half-empty coffee mugs. He checked his watch, 9:45 p.m. "Thanks for letting me work here, Poppy," he called out to his fellow teacher in the kitchen. "These quarterly assessments would have taken twice as long at home." "Anytime, Ethan," she replied. "Drive safe." The night air felt crisp against his face as he walked to his car. Crickets provided nature's soundtrack, their steady chirping a peaceful backdrop to his thoughts. As he settled into the driver's seat, his mind drifted to Tommy, a struggling student who'd shown small but meaningful progress lately. "If we could just find the right approach," Ethan muttered to himself, turning the key in the ignition. The familiar purr of his old sedan's engine joined the evening chorus. The countryside road stretched before him, a ribbon of asphalt winding through dark fields and scattered farmhouses. Moonlight filtered through passing trees, creating shifting patterns on his dashboard. The drive usually helped clear his mind after long days of teaching, and tonight was no exception. His shoulders relaxed as he mentally reviewed different teaching strategies that might help Tommy better understand fractions. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty road ahead. Empty, that is, until it wasn't. Ethan's heart leaped into his throat as a massive white form suddenly appeared in his lights. A horse, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. "Oh, God!" Ethan gasped, his foot slamming the brake pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and he gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as the car shuddered to a stop mere feet from the animal. The horse didn't flinch. It stood regally in the headlights, its white coat almost glowing. Ethan's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. But the horse remained eerily calm, as if waiting for something. With trembling fingers, Ethan switched on his hazard lights and opened his car door. His legs felt wobbly as he stepped onto the road, adrenaline still coursing through his system. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, tracking his movement, but it made no attempt to run. "What in the world are you doing here?" Ethan asked softly, taking careful steps toward the magnificent animal. Its response was immediate, a loud, clear neigh that seemed to echo through the quiet countryside. The sound made Ethan jump slightly, but the horse's steady gaze held him in place. Standing there on the dark road, Ethan knew he couldn't simply drive away and leave this creature to potentially cause another driver to crash. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to study him, waiting for his next move. Ethan stood by his idling car, his breathing gradually steadying as he studied the magnificent creature before him. The horse towered over him, its muscular frame both beautiful and intimidating. Even in the harsh glare of the headlights, there was something almost ethereal about its pristine white coat. His hand instinctively reached for the phone in his pocket. "I should probably call someone about this," he murmured, mostly to himself. The local sheriff's number was saved in his contacts. He'd needed it once before. when a fallen tree blocked the road. But as his fingers brushed against the phone, the horse took a deliberate step toward him. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Up close, the horse was even more impressive, its presence commanding yet somehow gentle. Another loud neigh broke the night's silence, and before Ethan could react, the horse's velvet nose pressed against his shoulder. The touch was soft but insistent, making him stumble back slightly. "Hey there, easy," he said, raising his hands. But there was no aggression in the horse's demeanor. If anything, it seemed almost urgent, its dark eyes fixed intently on him. Then, with graceful movements, the horse turned toward the woods that lined the road. It took several steps in that direction before stopping and looking back at Ethan. Another neigh pierced the night air, louder this time, more demanding. The horse pawed at the ground with one hoof, its head bobbing up and down. "You want me to follow you?" Ethan asked incredulously. The horse's behavior stirred something in him, a mix of curiosity and concern. This wasn't normal horse behavior, at least not from what little he knew about them. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan walked back to his car. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the heavy-duty flashlight he kept for emergencies. His rational mind told him this was crazy. Following a strange horse into the woods at night wasn't exactly a sensible decision. But something about the horse's urgent manner tugged at his conscience. The horse waited patiently as Ethan clicked on the flashlight and secured his car. As soon as he took a step toward the woods, the horse moved forward, leading him to a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the darkness between the trees. The beam of his flashlight caught the white tail swishing back and forth as the horse walked ahead, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure he was still following. "I must be out of my mind," Ethan muttered, carefully picking his way along the path. The ground was uneven beneath his feet, and branches reached out from both sides like grasping fingers. Yet the horse moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The moonlight barely filtered through the dense canopy above, making Ethan grateful for his flashlight as he followed the white horse deeper into the woods. His beam caught the signs of disturbance along the path, broken branches at knee height and fresh hoofprints pressed deep into the mud. The horse moved with determination, pausing occasionally to ensure Ethan kept pace. "Hello? Is anyone out here?" Ethan called out, his voice echoing through the trees. Only the whisper of wind through leaves and the soft thudding of the horse's hooves answered him. The night air had grown colder, and he pulled his jacket tighter around himself. As they pressed forward, the path narrowed and became more treacherous. Ethan's flashlight revealed more concerning signs, additional tracks that weren't from the horse. Small footprints appeared alongside the hoofprints, along with newly snapped twigs and disturbed undergrowth. His throat tightened as his mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. The horse's pace quickened, and Ethan struggled to keep up while avoiding roots and low-hanging branches. His heart pounded against his ribs, every instinct telling him something was wrong. The sound of running water grew louder, and he could smell the dampness of a creek ahead. Suddenly the horse stopped. Its powerful form stood rigid, head lowered towards something on the ground. A loud, urgent neigh pierced the quiet of the forest. Ethan hurried forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a horrifying scene. A small bicycle lay on its side, one wheel still slowly spinning. Next to it, a child's backpack had spilled its contents across the muddy ground. And there, just beside the quietly burbling creek, lay a young girl motionless on the damp earth. "Oh, God!" Ethan gasped, rushing to her side. He carefully set down his flashlight, positioning it to illuminate the area. His fingers trembled as he pressed them against her neck, searching for a pulse. Her skin felt cold, and dark bruises marked her pale face, but beneath his fingertips, he felt it, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. The white horse moved closer, lowering its head to gently nuzzle the girl's shoulder. Ethan quickly shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. "Hey," he said softly, his teacher's instincts taking over as he tried to wake her. "It's okay. I'm here to help." A faint whimper escaped the girl's lips, her eyelids fluttering briefly before she fell silent again. Ethan's hand shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911, silently thanking whatever twist of fate had put that mysterious horse in his path tonight. The girl felt fragile in Ethan's arms as he held her, trying to keep her warm with his jacket. "Help is coming," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. His flashlight cast long shadows through the trees, making the forest seem even more mysterious in the darkness. The white horse stood nearby, its coat almost glowing in the dim light. Every few minutes it would let out a soft neigh, as if checking on the girl. Its eyes never left her still form, maintaining a watchful vigil that struck Ethan as remarkably purposeful. The woods had fallen into an unsettling quiet, broken only by the gentle sounds of the creek and the horse's occasional sounds. Ethan kept checking his phone, willing the ambulance to arrive faster. The minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, the welcome sound of sirens pierced the night air. Red and white lights began to flash through the trees, and voices called out. Ethan shouted back, directing them to his location. 2 paramedics appeared on the path, carrying their equipment and a stretcher. "Over here," Ethan called, relief flooding through him. The paramedics rushed to his side, their trained hands already checking the girl's vital signs. "What happened here?" one of them asked as they carefully transferred her to the stretcher. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how strange his story would sound. "I was driving home when I found this white horse standing in the middle of the road," he explained, gesturing to where the horse now stood at a respectful distance. "It seemed to want me to follow it, and it led me straight to her. I found her unconscious by the creek." The paramedics exchanged glances, but remained focused on their work. They wrapped the girl in warm blankets and secured her to the stretcher. As they prepared to move her, one of them turned to Ethan. "She's hypothermic and has some injuries, but you found her just in time," the paramedic said. "Another hour out here in this cold?" He left the sentence unfinished, shaking his head. Ethan watched as they carried the girl away, the stretcher disappearing down the path toward the waiting ambulance. He turned to look at the horse, which stood calmly now, its earlier urgency replaced with what seemed like satisfaction. The horse took several steps toward him, its hooves silent on the soft earth. It lowered its head and gave a gentle neigh that seemed almost conversational. Then, with graceful movements, it turned and began walking toward the road. Ethan followed, his flashlight beam bouncing along the path as they made their way back. When they reached his car, still parked where he left it on the roadside, Ethan turned to the magnificent animal. "I guess I owe you a thank you," he said softly, feeling somewhat foolish for talking to a horse. The horse responded with a quiet neigh, its intelligent eyes fixed on Ethan's face, leaving him to wonder about the remarkable events of the night and just how much this mysterious creature truly understood. Ethan's car hummed quietly as he drove toward the hospital, his mind replaying the evening's strange events. He had watched the white horse disappear into the tree line, making sure it seemed safe before leaving. The image of Sophie's small, unconscious form kept floating back into his thoughts. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights made everything feel stark and artificial after the darkness of the woods. He approached the front desk, his shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "I'm here about the young girl who was just brought in," he explained to the receptionist. "I'm the one who found her." The woman typed something into her computer. She's in stable condition, but hasn't regained consciousness yet. Are you family?" "No, Ethan hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay." "I can take your contact information," she offered, sliding a form across the counter. "The doctors can update you on her condition." While filling out the paper, Ethan noticed two police officers talking in low voices near the waiting area. Their conversation caught his attention as he heard them mention Sophie's name. "2 days missing," one officer said, shaking his head. "The parents reported it right away." "There were definite signs of a struggle," the other replied. "Broken branches, scattered belongings. Something happened in those woods." Ethan's hand tightened around the pen he was holding. After a moment's hesitation, he walked over to the officers, clearing his throat quietly. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm the one who found Sophie. There's something you should know about how I found her." The officers turned to face him, their expressions curious but reserved. "You see, there was this horse," Ethan began, aware of how unusual his story would sound. "A white horse that stopped me on the road and led me directly to her. It seemed to know exactly where she was." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. "A horse led you to her?" the taller one asked. "I know it sounds strange," Ethan admitted, "but this horse was different. It was pure white, very intelligent. It deliberately got my attention and guided me to Sophie." The shorter officer's expression changed slightly. "Wait a minute," he said, pulling out his notebook. "We got a report last week about a stolen horse from the Marshall farm. Pure white, valuable animal." He flipped through his notes. "Owner said it was exceptionally well trained." "We'll look into it," the taller officer said, his tone more serious now. "Could you describe the horse in more detail?" As Ethan provided his description, he felt a growing uneasiness about the whole situation. Something about this case seemed deeper than a simple missing person incident. He left the hospital with a strange mixture of relief and concern, determined to learn more about the mysterious horse that had led him to Sophie. The morning sun cast long shadows across the police station steps as Ethan made his way inside. His night had been restless, filled with thoughts of Sophie and the mysterious white horse. At the front desk, he explained his purpose, and within minutes, he found himself sitting across from Detective Carla Mitchell. Detective Mitchell had kind eyes that contrasted with her professional demeanor. She listened intently as Ethan recounted the previous night's events, taking careful notes without interrupting. "Most people would have ignored the horse or called animal control right away," she said, looking up from her notebook. "What made you follow it?" Ethan shifted in his chair. "Something in its behavior, the way it looked at me. It wasn't just a lost animal. It knew what it was doing." Detective Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "I've worked enough cases to know that sometimes the strangest leads are worth following. Would you be willing to show us exactly where this happened?" An hour later, Ethan stood at the edge of the woods with Detective Mitchell, 2 other officers, and an animal control team. The morning air was crisp, and dew still clung to the grass. They followed the same path from the night before, with Ethan pointing out where he had first encountered the horse. "The tracks are still visible," one of the officers noted, pointing to the ground. As they ventured deeper into the woods, a soft neighing sound caught their attention. There, near the creek where Sophie had been found, stood the white horse. It looked directly at Ethan and stepped forward, its movements careful and deliberate. "That's her," Ethan said softly. The animal control officers approached slowly, speaking in calm voices. The horse remained still, allowing them to check its markings and a small identification chip embedded under its skin. "This is definitely Silver," confirmed one of the animal control officers. "She belongs to Mr. Adler's ranch. Been missing for about 3 weeks now." Detective Mitchell pulled out her phone. "I'll contact Mr. Adler immediately. This could be connected to our ongoing investigation." Ethan watched as the animal control team carefully secured Silver with a lead rope. The horse remained calm, occasionally glancing in his direction. He felt an unexpected tightness in his chest as they prepared to take her away. "Thank you," he whispered to Silver as she passed by him. The horse paused briefly, touching his shoulder with her nose, before allowing herself to be led toward the waiting trailer. Detective Mitchell appeared beside him. "Mr. Adler is on his way to meet us at the station. He might be able to help us understand how his stolen horse ended up helping us find a missing girl." They watched as Silver was safely loaded into the trailer, her white coat gleaming in the morning light. Despite the relief of solving one mystery, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to uncover about both Silver and Sophie's stories. The gravel crunched under the tires as Detective Mitchell's police cruiser pulled up to Adler Ranch. Sprawling pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with grazing horses against the backdrop of rolling hills. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered wooden fences and well-maintained barn. Mr. Adler stood waiting by the front gate, his weathered face creased with both welcome and worry. Despite his age, he stood straight and tall, his eyes sharp as they followed the approaching visitors. His calloused hands rested on the fence post as he nodded in greeting. "Welcome to Adler Ranch," he said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "I understand you found my Silver." Detective Mitchell stepped forward. "Yes, Mr. Adler, though the circumstances are rather unusual." She explained Silver's role in finding Sophie, watching as the rancher's expression grew darker with each detail. "3 weeks ago," Adler said, leading them toward the barn, "I came out for morning feeding and found 3 stalls empty. Silver and 2 others, just gone." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Whoever took them knew what they were doing. Inside the barn, Silver stood quietly in her stall, her white coat gleaming in the filtered sunlight. When she saw Adler, she stretched her neck over the stall door, nickering softly. "I always knew she was special," Adler continued, reaching up to stroke her nose. "Few years back, we had a young foal fall into the river during spring flooding. Before any of us could react, Silver had already jumped in, guided that little one right to the bank where we could pull it out." His voice carried pride tinged with sadness. "She's always had this way about her, like she understands more than most horses." Detective Mitchell pulled out her notebook. "Mr. Adler, have you had any problems with horse smugglers in the area before?" "Heard rumors," he replied, his expression grim. "Some of my neighbors lost horses, too. Professional job, they said, but nothing concrete enough to catch anybody." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully before asking, "Would you be willing to keep Silver here while we investigate? We might need to check on her or bring in specialists." "Of course," Adler agreed immediately. "She's home now. That's what matters." Ethan watched as Silver pressed her head against Adler's chest, the connection between them obvious and touching. Something about this case tugged at him. The stolen horses, Sophie's abduction, Silver's remarkable rescue. The pieces felt connected, but the picture wasn't clear yet. As they walked back to the car, Mitchell pulled out her phone to make some calls. Ethan took one last look at the barn, where Silver's white face could be seen watching them through the door. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, that Sophie's abductor and the horse thieves might be connected in ways they were only beginning to understand. Ethan walked down the sterile hospital corridor, his footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm patches of light along the walls. When he reached Sophie's room, he found her sitting up in bed, looking small, but more alert than the night before. "Hi, Sophie," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm Ethan, the person who found you last night." Sophie's eyes brightened with recognition. "The horse led you to me. she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The white horse." "That's right." Ethan pulled up a chair beside her bed. "Her name is Silver." A tiny smile appeared on Sophie's face. "Silver," she repeated. "She stayed with me, you know. When I was scared, she wouldn't leave me alone." Her fingers twisted in the hospital blanket. "Thank you for following her." Before Ethan could respond, Detective Mitchell appeared in the doorway. She nodded at Ethan before turning to Sophie with a gentle smile. "Sophie, how are you feeling?" Mitchell asked, approaching the bed. "Better," Sophie replied, though she seemed to shrink a little into her pillows. Mitchell pulled Ethan aside, keeping her voice low. "We've confirmed Silver's identity with absolute certainty. She was one of 3 horses stolen from Adler's ranch." She glanced at Sophie, then back to Ethan. "But here's what's interesting. The location where you found Sophie is nearly 20 miles from Adler's property. That's quite a journey for a stolen horse to make, especially to end up exactly where she was needed." Ethan frowned. "You think there's more to this?" "Horse smuggling rings don't typically intersect with child abductions," Mitchell said. "Unless—" Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse coming to check Sophie's vitals. Ethan said goodbye to Sophie, promising to visit again soon, and headed toward the parking lot. He had just reached his car when his phone rang. It was Detective Mitchell. "Sophie just told me something important," Mitchell said without preamble. "She mentioned a man who seemed very familiar with the local terrain. Said he knew all the back roads and trails, even the ones that weren't on any maps. I need you to meet me at Adler's ranch this afternoon. We need to understand how Silver got away and ended up finding Sophie. Something doesn't add up." "What time should I be there?" Ethan asked, already feeling that familiar pull of concern and curiosity that had drawn him into this case. 3 o'clock, Mitchell replied. "And Ethan? Thank you for staying involved. Sophie seems to trust you, and that's important right now." At the hospital, Sophie sat cross-legged on her bed, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate. Detective Mitchell sat nearby, her notepad ready as she gently encouraged Sophie to share what she remembered. "He kept talking about a pony," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "Said if I was good, he'd let me see it." She took a sip of her drink, gathering courage. "There were other horses, too. I could hear them moving around and making noise at night." Detective Mitchell leaned forward. "Can you tell me about where they kept you?" Sophie's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "It was like a barn, but old. It smelled musty, like wet wood. The floor was concrete, and there were empty stalls." Her eyes grew distant. "I could hear lots of animals, not just horses." Mitchell wrote quickly in her notepad, her expression focused. This new information seemed to spark something in her mind. At Adler's ranch that afternoon, Ethan stood by the fence watching Silver graze peacefully in the afternoon sun. Mr. Adler joined him, his weathered hands resting on the wooden rail. "You know," Adler began, his voice warm with pride, "Silver's always been special. Last spring we had 3 calves break through the fence during a storm. Silver found them before any of us could, led them right back home." He paused, adjusting his hat. "Another time, we had a mountain lion skulking near the stables. Silver started acting up, making noise, pawing the ground. Got my attention just in time to spot it, before it could get to any of the smaller animals." Ethan watched Silver lift her head, ears pricked forward. "So she has a history of helping others." "More than you'd believe," Adler nodded. "That horse understands things most humans don't." The crunch of tires on gravel announced Detective Mitchell's arrival. She strode toward them, her expression urgent. "Mr. Adler," she called out, "Sophie's given us some new details. She mentioned a barn-like structure, possibly abandoned." Are there any properties like that in the area? Adler straightened up, his expression thoughtful. Matter of fact, there are 3 I can think of. Old Peterson Place about 5 miles east. Hasn't been used in years. Then there's the Matthews property, just past the county line. And the old auction house on Route 7, though that's pretty far out. Mitchell pulled out a map. Could you mark these locations? We need to check them all. As Adler pointed out the properties, Ethan noticed Silver had moved closer to the fence, her eyes fixed on their group, as if she understood the importance of their conversation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Ethan's car followed Detective Mitchell's police vehicle down a narrow dirt road. They approached the old Peterson barn, its weathered wooden walls leaning slightly to one side. 2 other police cars pulled up behind them, their engines falling silent in the still air. Stay behind us, Mitchell instructed as they got out of their vehicles. Her hand rested on her holster as she surveyed the abandoned structure. Ethan hung back, his thoughts drifting to Silver back at Adler's ranch. Something about the horse's behavior made him believe she could lead them straight to what they were looking for. But for now, he watched as Mitchell's team moved carefully toward the barn's entrance. The large doors creaked open, revealing a musty interior thick with shadows. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating years of neglect. The officers moved systematically through the space while Ethan stayed near the entrance, taking in every detail. Over here, Mitchell called out, her light focused on a corner. Coiled ropes lay partially hidden under fresh hay, their placement too neat to be accidental. Scattered around were patches of disturbed dirt showing clear hoofprints. This section's been used recently, one officer noted, pointing to marks on the walls where something had rubbed away years of dust. Mitchell moved deeper into the barn, her flashlight revealing more evidence. Behind some old machinery, she discovered a cache of equipment, bridles, saddles, and various tools, all looking far too new to belong in the abandoned building. These are professional grade, she said, examining a leather bridle. Expensive, too. No way these were left here by accident. The search continued, but the barn held no other occupants. Sophie's abductor had clearly moved on, leaving only traces of his operation behind. As they emerged from the barn, Ethan's eyes caught something in the dirt. He walked a few steps, following a pattern in the ground. "Detective Mitchell," he called out, crouching down. "Look at these tracks." Mitchell joined him, shining her light on the hoofprints that led toward the tree line. They were distinctive, showing a slight irregularity in the right front print. "These match Silver's gait," Ethan explained, remembering how the horse had moved at Adler's ranch. "See how the right front hoof print's slightly deeper?" Mitchell studied the tracks intently. "Good catch," she said, straightening up. "Johnson, Peters, let's follow these. They might lead us somewhere important." The team regrouped, preparing to trace the hoof prints into the woods. Ethan felt a surge of validation. Silver's involvement in this case was becoming clearer with each discovery. Back at Adler's ranch, the late afternoon sun painted the barnyard in warm hues. Ethan and Detective Mitchell sat with Adler on his weathered porch, the old rancher's face creased with concern as he stroked his chin. "2 men," Adler said, his voice rough with emotion. "They showed up about a week before Silver and the others disappeared. Said they were interested in buying horses for a riding school." He shook his head slowly. One of them, the younger fellow, kept watching Silver. Spent nearly an hour just observing her interact with the other horses. Mitchell leaned forward in her chair. "Did anything specific catch his attention?" "Silver was helping me round up some yearlings that day," Adler explained. "She's always had this way about her, knows exactly where to position herself to guide other horses." The man noticed, asked all sorts of questions about her training. Ethan watched Silver grazing in the nearby paddock, her white coat glowing in the sunset. "You mentioned she was trained specially?" Adler nodded, his eyes brightening with pride. Silver's different from any horse I've worked with. Quick to learn, understands complex commands. We trained her to guide riders home if they got lost, to respond to specific whistle patterns. He paused, reaching for his coffee mug. She once led my neighbor's boy back to the ranch when he fell and hurt his ankle. Found him nearly 2 miles out. That explains how she knew to lead me to Sophie, Ethan said softly, the pieces falling into place. She wasn't just wandering. She was purposely seeking help. Mitchell pulled out her notebook. Mr. Adler, would you say Silver could recognize signs of distress? In people or animals? Without a doubt, Adler replied firmly. She's got this sixth sense about trouble. Always seems to know when something's wrong. Ethan stood up, moving to the porch railing. So if Sophie was in danger, Silver would have known exactly what to do, Adler finished. Find help and lead them back. Mitchell closed her notebook with purpose. These men didn't just steal a valuable horse. They recognized Silver's unique abilities. A horse that intelligent, that responsive to human behavior. She'd be perfect for gaining people's trust. Or luring them in, Ethan added, his stomach tightening at the thought. Using her as bait, Mitchell concluded grimly. Smart enough to follow commands, but also capable of leading someone to safety if things went wrong. They knew exactly what they were getting. Ethan watched Silver raise her head, ears pricked forward as she gazed toward the woods. His determination solidified. We need to find these men, not just for Sophie, but for what they did to Silver, using her intelligence against innocent people. It's wrong. Mitchell nodded in agreement, standing to join him at the railing. We will. Silver's already helped us more than they counted on. She's left us a trail to follow. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight as Ethan sat at his wooden table, papers scattered in front of him. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he traced his finger over a rough map of the woods near the abandoned barn. The faint hoof prints they'd discovered kept pulling at his thoughts, like an unfinished puzzle demanding attention. He rubbed his tired eyes, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The moon cast long shadows through his kitchen window as he reached for his phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing Mitchell's number. Detective Mitchell, I'm sorry for calling so late, but I've been thinking about those tracks we found, Ethan said, his voice quiet but urgent. What if we brought Silver back there? She might recognize something we missed. Mitchell's voice crackled through the speaker, alert despite the hour. That's actually not a bad idea, Ethan. Silver's already proven she's more observant than we expected. The next morning dawned crisp and clear as Ethan pulled into Adler's ranch. Detective Mitchell was already there with 2 other officers, their police vehicles parked discreetly behind the barn. Adler stood by Silver's stall, his weathered face creased with worry. Taking her back there. Adler shook his head slowly. What if those men are still around? We'll have officers securing the area, Mitchell assured him, her badge glinting in the morning light. Silver might be our best chance at finding evidence we can use. Adler stroked Silver's nose, looking into her intelligent eyes. After a long moment, he nodded. She's always had good instincts, better than most people I know. They carefully saddled Silver, Ethan noticing how the horse seemed to sense the importance of the moment. She stood perfectly still as Adler adjusted the straps, her ears forward and alert. The group made their way to the abandoned barn, Silver walking calmly between Ethan and Mitchell. When they reached the trailhead where the hoofprints began, Silver's demeanor changed instantly. She tossed her head and let out a sharp neigh, her hooves pawing at the dirt path with purpose. Look at that, Mitchell said softly. She definitely remembers this place. Following Silver's lead, they moved deeper into the woods. The horse picked her way carefully along the trail, stopping occasionally to inspect the ground. They passed several areas where the underbrush had been trampled, creating distinct patterns that Mitchell's team photographed and documented. Suddenly, Silver halted. Her ears swiveled back and forth, her whole body tensing as she stood motionless on the path. The morning breeze rustled through the leaves above them, but Silver remained frozen, as if listening to something only she could hear. Mitchell held up her hand, signaling everyone to stay quiet. Silver's nostrils flared, her eyes fixed on a point deeper in the woods. The tension in her posture told them all that something had caught her attention, something that made her both alert and wary. Following Silver's alert stance, Mitchell signaled her team to move forward with caution. Ethan stayed close to the horse, one hand resting lightly on her neck. The morning dew still clung to the leaves around them, making everything shimmer in the filtered sunlight. Silver moved with deliberate steps, her hooves barely making a sound on the soft forest floor. Every few yards, she would pause and let out a gentle nicker, as if confirming they were heading in the right direction. Ethan watched in amazement as the horse navigated the increasingly dense woodland with clear purpose. "She really knows where she's going," he whispered to Mitchell, who nodded in response. The trees grew closer together, their branches creating a thick canopy overhead that dimmed the morning light. The air felt heavier here, and the team's footsteps became more careful as they pushed through the undergrowth. Suddenly, Silver led them into a small clearing, partially hidden by a natural formation of rocks and fallen trees. The site was well concealed, but signs of recent human activity were everywhere. A fire pit still released thin wisps of smoke, and various items lay scattered around. Water bottles, food wrappers, and more concerning items like coiled ropes and a torn horse blanket bearing Adler's Ranch logo. "Search the area," Mitchell ordered her team quietly. "Document everything, but don't disturb anything more than necessary." The officers spread out, photographing and cataloging each piece of evidence. Ethan watched as Silver moved purposefully toward a pile of branches and debris near the edge of the campsite. She sniffed intently at the ground, pawing gently at the scattered leaves. "Detective," Ethan called softly, "I think Silver's found something." Mitchell joined them as Ethan carefully moved aside some of the branches. Underneath, partially hidden by leaves, lay a crumpled piece of paper. Mitchell pulled on latex gloves and gently unfolded it to reveal a detailed map of the surrounding area. Several locations were marked with X's, but what caught their attention was a large red circle around what appeared to be another barn, much bigger than the first one they'd investigated. "This could be it," Mitchell said, holding the map steady while another officer photographed it. "This location is several miles north of here, in a much more isolated area." The team gathered around to examine the discovery, while Silver stood guard, her ears still moving back and forth, monitoring their surroundings. Mitchell carefully placed the map in an evidence bag, her expression serious as she studied the marked location one more time. "We need to regroup," she announced to her team. "This requires careful planning and probably more backup." The police station buzzed with activity as Mitchell's team pored over the newly discovered map. Officers huddled around computer screens, cross-referencing the marked location with satellite imagery and property records. The barn sat isolated on the outskirts of town, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that hadn't seen regular traffic in years. "Look at this," Mitchell pointed to her screen. "The property's been abandoned for almost a decade. Perfect hideout for illegal operations." As the team sketched out preliminary raid plans, an officer burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. "Detective, we just got a report of another horse theft. Cedar Grove Farm, about 20 miles south." Ethan leaned forward, studying the details. The horse, a bay mare with distinctive white socks, had vanished during the night. Just like at Adler's ranch, the thieves had left minimal evidence behind. "This isn't just about Sophie anymore," Mitchell said, spreading out photos from both cases. "We're looking at an organized operation. They're using these abandoned properties as holding sites before moving the horses somewhere else." The team gathered around a large table as Mitchell laid out her theory. "Sophie must have seen something she wasn't supposed to. The abductor probably panicked and took her. But Silver—" She paused, glancing at Ethan. "Silver somehow managed to escape and find help." "If they're still actively stealing horses," another officer added, "they might be planning to clear out soon. These kinds of operations don't stay in one place long." Mitchell nodded grimly. "We need to move fast. Tonight, before they have a chance to relocate." As the team began finalizing their raid plans, Ethan stepped forward. "I want to come with you," he said firmly. "Silver trusts me. She might be able to help if things get complicated." Mitchell considered this for a moment before agreeing. They drove to Adler's ranch to collect Silver, finding the old rancher in his yard, fixing a fence post. Adler listened carefully as they explained the situation. His weathered face showed concern, but when he looked at how Silver stood calmly beside Ethan, his expression softened. "If Silver trusts you," he said slowly, "I trust you. Just bring her back safe." As the team made final preparations, Ethan stood beside Silver, gently stroking her neck. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. This could be their only chance to catch Sophie's abductor and break up the smuggling ring. Silver nudged his shoulder gently, as if sensing his anxiety, and Ethan took a deep breath to steady himself. The night settled over the countryside like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a tense silence that made every rustle of leaves sound like thunder. Mitchell's team took their positions around the weathered barn, their movements careful and precise. Ethan stood behind one of the police vehicles, his hand resting on Silver's neck. The horse's muscles were taut, but she remained remarkably still. Her ears perked forward as if listening intently. "Everyone in position?" Mitchell's whispered command crackled through the radio. A series of quiet confirmations followed. The barn loomed before them, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the star-filled sky. Dim light leaked through cracks in the wooden walls, confirming activity inside. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the officers move into their final positions. Mitchell raised her hand, then dropped it sharply. The team burst into action, converging on the barn from all sides. "Police, don't move!" The shouts pierced the night air as officers breached the entrance. Inside, they found exactly what they'd suspected. Several horses stood in makeshift stalls, including the recently stolen bay mare from Cedar Grove Farm. The animals shifted nervously at the sudden commotion. A crash from the back of the barn drew everyone's attention. A man had burst through a concealed door, making a desperate break for the woods. Before anyone could react, Silver let out a piercing neigh and bolted forward, breaking free from Ethan's loose grip. She charged toward the fleeing suspect, her white coat gleaming in the darkness. The man looked back at the sound of thundering hooves and lost his footing. He tumbled to the ground, rolling in the dirt as Silver circled him, effectively blocking his escape route. "Don't move!" Mitchell commanded, training her flashlight on the suspect as officers rushed to secure him. The man's face, illuminated in the harsh beam, matched Sophie's description perfectly. The same cold eyes and angular features she described to the sketch artist. As the officers hauled him to his feet, Mitchell checked his ID against their database. "Part of the Carter smuggling ring," she confirmed, her voice tight with satisfaction. "We've been after this group for months." The scene transformed into organized chaos as animal control arrived with trailers. One by one, they loaded the rescued horses, checking them for injuries and cross-referencing identifying marks with theft reports. The bay mare from Cedar Grove Farm nickered softly as she was guided to safety. Ethan watched it all unfold, still processing the events. Silver returned to his side, calm once again, as if she hadn't just helped capture a criminal. He reached out and stroked her mane, marveling at her intelligence and courage. "You really are incredible," he whispered. Silver responded with a gentle knee, pressing her nose against his shoulder in a familiar gesture. The morning sun cast long shadows across Adler's ranch as Ethan pulled into the gravel driveway. His car tires crunched over the loose stones, and he could see Silver grazing peacefully in the nearest paddock. The other rescued horses had been returned to their rightful owners, but the memories of last night's raid were still fresh in his mind. As he stepped out of his car, he noticed another vehicle parked nearby, a modest blue sedan he didn't recognize. Walking toward the barn, he heard familiar voices drift through the morning air. Sophie sat in a wheelchair near the barn entrance, her mother standing protectively beside her. The girl's face was still pale, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Adler stood nearby, his weathered hands resting on the fence post as he watched Silver graze. "Good morning," Ethan called out softly, not wanting to startle anyone. Sophie turned toward him, a shy smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Grayson," she exclaimed, her voice stronger than it had been in the hospital. Can I see Silver up close?" Adler nodded, opening the paddock gate. Silver lifted her head at the movement, her ears perking forward with interest. The horse walked over slowly, her hooves making soft thuds against the packed earth. Sophie's hands trembled as she gripped the wheelchair's armrests. Her foster mother wheeled her closer to the fence, and Silver approached with gentle steps. The horse's white coat gleamed in the morning light as she lowered her head to Sophie's level. For a moment, horse and girl simply looked at each other. Then Silver released a soft neigh, as though greeting an old friend. Sophie reached out with shaking fingers, touching Silver's velvet nose. Tears began streaming down the girl's face as she wrapped her arms around Silver's neck. "Thank you," Sophie whispered into Silver's mane. "Thank you for finding me, for saving me." The horse stood perfectly still, allowing Sophie to hug her. Ethan glanced at Adler and noticed the tough old rancher quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She's something special, isn't she?" Ethan said quietly to Adler. The rancher nodded, clearing his throat. "In all my years with horses, I've never seen one quite like Silver. Her intelligence, her loyalty, she never ceases to amaze me." Sophie finally released her hold on Silver, though she kept one hand resting on the horse's neck. "Mr. Adler," she said, her voice small but hopeful, "would it be okay if I came to visit Silver sometimes?" Adler's face softened. "Of course you can, sweetheart. Silver would like that very much, I think." The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as they stood there, watching Sophie stroke Silver's nose. The horse remained gentle and attentive, occasionally nickering softly as if responding to the girl's quiet words of gratitude. The soft glow of the library's reading lamp illuminated Ethan's notebook as he pored over yet another book about animal intelligence. Stacks of references surrounded him. Stories of dolphins saving swimmers, dogs detecting illness, and horses showing remarkable problem-solving abilities. His eyes widened as he discovered accounts similar to Silver's heroic actions. "Fascinating, isn't it?" the librarian whispered, noticing his intense focus. Ethan nodded, carefully noting down another reference. The more he read, the more he understood that Silver's actions weren't just luck or coincidence. Scientific studies showed that horses possess deep emotional intelligence and an uncanny ability to read human emotions. Each discovery made him think back to that night on the dark road, seeing Silver's determined stance in a new light. During his daily visits to check on Sophie's recovery, he watched the special bond growing between the girl and Silver. The horse seemed to know exactly when to be gentle, when to playfully nuzzle Sophie's hand, and when to simply stand quietly beside her wheelchair. These moments stirred something in Ethan's heart, compelling him to share their story. Late one evening, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, Ethan began writing. The words flowed easily as he described that fateful night, Silver's incredible intuition, and the events that led to Sophie's rescue. He carefully crafted each paragraph, wanting to capture not just the facts, but the emotional depth of their experience. The next morning, Ethan drove to Adler's ranch with the draft in hand. The old rancher sat on his porch, reading glasses perched on his nose, as he went through each page. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached the final paragraph. "You've got to send this to the paper," Adler said, looking up at Ethan. "People need to hear this story. They need to understand what these animals are capable of." Encouraged by Adler's response, Ethan submitted his article to the local newspaper. The editor called him the very next day, excited about publishing A Hero with Four Hooves, How Silver Saved Sophie. When the article appeared in print, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from too many visitors. Local television stations called requesting interviews. People drove by Adler's ranch, hoping to catch a glimpse of Silver. Social media buzzed with shares and comments about the story. Animal advocacy groups reached out, praising the article for highlighting the emotional intelligence of horses. Parents wrote about reading the story to their children, teaching them about kindness and the special connection between humans and animals. Sitting in his classroom after school, surrounded by his students' artwork and reading assignments, Ethan read through the flood of responses. Each message reinforced what he had felt that night on the dark road, that there was something truly remarkable about the bond between humans and animals, something worth sharing with the world. The small town of Pine Valley buzzed with excitement as news vans lined the dusty road leading to Adler's ranch. Reporters clutched their microphones and cameramen adjusted their equipment, all eager to capture the story of the remarkable horse that had saved a young girl's life. Silver stood majestically in the paddock, her white coat gleaming in the morning sun. She remained oddly serene despite the commotion, occasionally glancing at Ethan and Sophie, who waited nearby for their interview. "And how did you feel when Silver found you?" a reporter asked Sophie gently, kneeling to meet her eye level. Sophie twisted the hem of her sweater, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so scared and cold," she said. "But then Silver came and stood over me, keeping me warm until help arrived." Her eyes brightened as she looked at the horse. "She made me feel safe." Ethan stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Silver showed remarkable intelligence that night," he explained to the cameras. "She deliberately stopped my car and led me to Sophie. It wasn't random. She knew exactly what she was doing." Mr. Adler hung back near the barn entrance, his weathered face showing discomfort at all the attention. He politely declined most interview requests, preferring to let Ethan do the talking. However, his expression changed when the ranch's office manager approached with news about the donations pouring in. "People want to help, Mr. Adler," she explained, showing him the growing list of contributions. "They're inspired by Silver's story." Adler's eyes misted over as he realized what this meant for his beloved ranch. Within days, workers began repairs on the old stable roof. Fresh paint brightened the fencing, and new feeding equipment arrived to replace the aging tools. Through it all, Silver maintained her usual calm demeanor. She accepted the occasional pat from admiring visitors, but seemed most content when Sophie came to visit, gently nuzzling the girl's hand and standing perfectly still beside her wheelchair. One quiet afternoon, as the media frenzy began to settle, Sophie watched Silver grazing peacefully in the pasture. She turned to Ethan, her eyes full of hope. "Do you think—" She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Do you think I could learn to ride her someday?" Ethan smiled warmly. "I think that's a wonderful idea." He glanced at Adler, who had been checking the new fence nearby. The old rancher walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Silver would be honored to carry you, young lady," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She chose you, after all." Sophie's face lit up with joy, and Silver, as if understanding the conversation, lifted her head and let out a gentle neigh. The sound echoed across the ranch, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of hay across Adler's ranch as Sophie carefully brushed Silver's gleaming coat. Her small hands moved with growing confidence, guided by Adler's patient instructions. "That's it, nice and gentle," Adler said, watching Sophie work. "Silver loves being groomed right behind her ears." As if to confirm this, Silver lowered her head contentedly, letting out a soft snort of approval. Sophie giggled, a sound that had become more frequent during her visits to the ranch. Ethan leaned against the stable door, taking in the peaceful scene. These afternoon visits had become the highlight of his week too. The quiet routine of ranch life offered a welcome contrast to his busy classroom days. "You're becoming quite the horse expert," Ethan remarked as Sophie methodically worked through her grooming routine. Sophie beamed at the compliment. "Mr. Adler's teaching me everything," she said. "Did you know horses can sense when you're scared? That's why it's important to stay calm around them." During these quiet moments, Sophie began sharing more about what had happened to her. Sometimes it came in small fragments, a memory triggered by a sound or smell. Other times, she would suddenly pause in her work, her voice becoming serious. "The bad man had other horses too," she told them one afternoon while filling Silver's water trough. "They didn't look happy like the horses here. They seemed scared." Ethan carefully noted these details, passing them along to Detective Mitchell. Each piece of information helped build a stronger case against her abductor and the smuggling ring. The ranch had become Sophie's sanctuary. Here, surrounded by the gentle presence of the horses and the watchful eyes of Adler and Ethan, she slowly emerged from her shell. Her therapist remarked on the positive changes, noting how talking about Silver seemed to help Sophie process her trauma. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Adler decided Sophie was ready for her first ride. He led Silver into the corral while Ethan helped Sophie with her helmet and safety vest. "Remember what we practiced," Adler said as he adjusted the stirrups. "Nice and easy." With Ethan's help, Sophie settled into the saddle. Her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the reins, but Silver remained perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of this moment. "You're doing great," Ethan encouraged, walking alongside as Adler led Silver in a slow circle. Sophie sat straighter in the saddle, her initial nervousness melting away. As Silver carried her around the corral, a bright smile spread across her face, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes. It was the first genuine smile Ethan had seen since finding her in the woods that night. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched Sophie's transformation. Silver had done more than just save Sophie's life. She had given the girl a path to healing, a way to rebuild her confidence and trust. The horse's gentle strength seemed to flow into Sophie with each step they took together. Detective Mitchell's police cruiser kicked up a small cloud of dust as it rolled up to Adler's ranch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property as she stepped out, clutching a thick folder against her chest. Ethan, Adler, and Sophie's mother gathered in the ranch's cozy office while Sophie played with Silver in the nearby paddock, visible through the window. "We've made significant progress in the case," Mitchell announced, spreading several documents across Adler's weathered desk. "The abductor has been formally charged, along with 6 other members of the smuggling ring. They're facing multiple counts of animal trafficking, child endangerment, and grand theft." Sophie's mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Thank goodness," she whispered. Mitchell continued, her voice steady but tinged with satisfaction. "We discovered something interesting during the investigation. The ring specifically targeted Silver because of her exceptional intelligence. They'd been watching her for months." Adler's weathered face darkened. "What did they want with her?" "They were using her unique abilities as bait," Mitchell explained. "They noticed how Silver could lead other horses and gain their trust quickly. They planned to use her to lure more valuable horses from other properties." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "But they didn't count on her loyalty and intelligence working against them." "Exactly," Mitchell agreed, pulling out more photographs of the recovered horses. "Your quick thinking that night, Ethan, and Silver's remarkable actions helped us crack this case wide open. We've recovered 12 stolen horses so far, and we're still following leads." Through the window, they could see Sophie leading Silver in gentle circles, her small hand resting confidently on the horse's neck. The sight brought a smile to everyone's faces. "The district attorney wanted me to personally thank you all," Mitchell said. "Your testimonies, especially Sophie's brave statement, have been invaluable. And Ethan, your article about Silver helped other victims come forward." Ethan watched Sophie and Silver, feeling a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The pieces had fallen into place like a perfect puzzle. Silver's protective instincts, Sophie's incredible bravery, and the community's unwavering support. As Mitchell gathered her papers to leave, they all stepped outside. Sophie approached them, her hand still resting on Silver's strong neck. She looked up at the detective with clear, steady eyes, so different from the frightened girl they'd found in the woods. "Is the bad man going away for a long time?" she asked quietly. Mitchell knelt down to Sophie's level. "Yes, sweetheart. He and his friends won't be able to hurt anyone else." Sophie turned to Silver, gently stroking the horse's silky mane. "You're safe now," she whispered, leaning against the horse's shoulder. "Just like me." The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Adler gathered everyone at his ranch for an important announcement. His weathered face broke into a rare, warm smile as he looked at the small group assembled before him: Ethan, Sophie, her foster mother, and several ranch hands. "I've been thinking long and hard about Silver's future," Adler began, his voice filled with emotion. "After everything that's happened, I believe she has an even greater purpose. That's why I've decided to donate her to the Golden Meadows Equine Therapy Program." Sophie's eyes widened, and for a moment fear flickered across her face at the thought of losing her connection with Silver. But Adler quickly continued, "And Sophie, you'll be their very first participant." The young girl's face lit up with joy, and she rushed forward to hug the old rancher. "Really? I can still see Silver?" "3 times a week," her mother confirmed, smiling at Sophie's excitement. The following week, they all visited the therapy facility together. Golden Meadows sat on 20 acres of rolling hills, with white fences enclosing lush pastures. The main barn was painted a cheerful red, and flowering bushes lined the gravel driveway. Sarah Martinez, the program director, greeted them warmly. "Welcome to Golden Meadows," she said, leading them on a tour. "We've prepared a special space for Silver, and our staff is excited to work with both of you, Sophie." The local community turned out in force for Silver's introduction ceremony. Detective Mitchell stood with several officers who had worked the case, all of them beaming as they watched Sophie lead Silver around the arena. The horse's coat gleamed in the sunlight, her stride proud but gentle as she followed Sophie's lead. Mayor Thompson presented a plaque commemorating Silver's heroism, while Adler spoke briefly about the horse's remarkable journey from his ranch to becoming a symbol of hope and healing for the community. When the ceremony concluded, Sophie took Silver's lead rope and walked confidently toward the main pasture. The horse followed her with complete trust, their bond evident in every step. At the gate, Sophie turned back to wave at Ethan, her smile radiant and full of promise. The shadows that had once haunted her eyes were gone, replaced by pure joy. Ethan stood beside Adler, watching the pair. His heart felt full as he observed the transformation in both Sophie and Silver, from victims of circumstance to bearers of hope for others who would follow in their footsteps. "You did good, son," Adler said quietly, patting Ethan's shoulder. "You did real good." The autumn days grew shorter, but Golden Meadows' equine therapy program buzzed with activity. Silver had become the heart of the program, drawing children from across 3 counties. Her gentle demeanor and patient spirit made her the perfect therapy horse, especially for the more traumatized kids. Sophie, no longer the shy, frightened girl from months ago, had blossomed into a natural leader. She stood confidently beside Silver's stall, demonstrating proper grooming techniques to a group of wide-eyed children. "See how Silver lowers her head when you brush here?" she explained, showing a small boy how to use the curry comb. "That means she likes it. She's telling us we're doing a good job." The children gathered around, each taking turns under Sophie's watchful eye. Even the most hesitant kids eventually found courage through her patient guidance. Silver remained perfectly still, occasionally nickering softly when a child needed encouragement. Ethan visited 3 times a week, helping with the afternoon sessions. He'd set up a small desk in the corner of the barn office, where he worked on his book between helping with lessons. His laptop filled with notes about Silver's remarkable journey, from her theft to her heroic rescue of Sophie, and now her vital role in helping other children heal. "What about the part where Silver found me?" Sophie asked one afternoon, peering over Ethan's shoulder at his draft. "Could you mention how she stayed with me until help came?" Ethan smiled, adding her suggestion to his notes. "That's perfect, Sophie. You're becoming quite the editor." The therapy sessions continued to evolve. Some days, Silver would lead groups of children through trust exercises in the arena. Other days, she'd stand perfectly still, as younger kids learned to overcome their fears by simply touching her soft nose or brushing her mane. One particularly beautiful evening, Ethan sat on the wooden fence near the main pasture. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the grass. Sophie, now confident in her riding abilities, guided Silver through a gentle gallop across the field. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, horse and rider moving as one. Silver's white coat gleamed in the fading light, her mane flowing like silk in the breeze. Sophie sat tall in the saddle, her face glowing with pure joy. The sight captured everything Ethan had hoped to convey in his book: the incredible bond between humans and animals, the power of trust, and the healing that comes from unconditional love. Later, as he returned to his laptop, Ethan typed out the title that had been forming in his mind: Silver, A Hero's Tale. Sophie leaned against his shoulder, nodding in approval as she read the words on the screen. "It's perfect," she whispered, watching Silver graze peacefully in the distance. "She really is a hero." The autumn festival transformed the town square into a celebration of hope and healing. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and hay bales decorated with ribbons created informal seating around a makeshift stage. Silver stood proudly near the podium, her white coat gleaming in the morning sun. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Today, we honor not just a remarkable horse, but the extraordinary people who helped uncover a criminal operation and establish a program that continues to help countless children. Adler received his award first, ducking his head modestly as the mayor praised his dedication to the ranch and his willingness to share Silver's gift with others. Ethan accepted his recognition next, though his eyes kept drifting to Sophie, who fidgeted nervously beside her mother. When Sophie's turn came, she approached the microphone slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded a piece of paper, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "I used to be scared of everything," she began, "but Silver showed me what real courage looks like. She found me when I was lost, stayed with me when I was afraid, and brought people like Mr. Ethan and Mr. Adler into my life." She paused, looking at Silver with shining eyes. "Silver saved my life, but she also gave me a future." The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Sophie's mother hugged her tightly as she returned to her seat. As the ceremony wound down, Sophie mounted Silver for a victory lap around the square. The crowd cheered as they passed, Silver's gait steady and proud. Ethan stood beside Adler, watching the pair move in perfect harmony. "Remember that night you found her on the road?" Adler asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Ethan nodded, thinking back to the moment that changed everything. "Seems like a lifetime ago." Adler crossed his arms, a knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "You know, Ethan, sometimes it's not us who find the path. It's the ones who lead us there." As the festival crowd began to disperse, Ethan made his way to the nearby field where Silver would spend the evening. The setting sun painted the sky in deep purples and oranges, casting long shadows across the grass. He approached Silver slowly, reaching out to stroke her silky mane. The horse lowered her head, accepting his touch with the same gentle demeanor she'd shown since that first night. "You changed all of us, girl," he whispered. Silver lifted her head, fixing him with that same intelligent gaze that had caught his attention on that dark road months ago. Then, with a soft snort, she turned and galloped across the pasture, her white coat glowing in the fading light. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan and Silver, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.